Well, thank you, Vivek. I appreciate that nice introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, and possibly good evening to everyone on the call. As Vivek said, my name is Jack Garvey, and I'm the founder and chief executive officer of Compliance Architects LLC. I'm thrilled to be here today with everyone to talk about risk-based quality planning. And before I get started, though, I really would like to give a warm thank you to I2E Consulting, our technology partners with respect to risk-based quality planning, for hosting and facilitating this webinar. So let's jump right in. To expand a little bit about Vivek's introduction on my background, I've been in FDA-regulated industry for a little over 30 years. I started out as a plant floor engineer for Wyeth Pharmaceutical, now part of Pfizer. And over the years, I've worked in a variety of different roles of increasing responsibility for some of the world's best companies, including Ciba-Geigy, now Novartis, BASF Corporation, and Johnson & Johnson. As Vivek said, I'm a chemical engineer by original training and also an attorney. I founded Compliance Architects just over 10 years ago. As a consultant, I and our firm focuses on quality system development, quality system improvement, compliance and quality risk management, FDA 43 and warning letter responses, and FDA 43 warning letter and consent decree enforcement remediation, planning, and execution. We have a lot of material to cover today, and we're going to be moving through the slides and materials very quickly. We will have time at the end, about 10 minutes, for questions, so please feel free to submit any questions as we go along in the Zoom question window, and I'll address them in order at the end. We'll also be doing a quick survey. Hopefully it'll work all well, right about in the middle of the presentation. So we're going to start with the discussion about quality plans generally. Then we're going to talk about risk and different aspects of risk. Next, we're going to talk about risk-based quality plans. And finally, we will talk a little bit about our risk-based quality plan methodology and approach that we call our CRP and Quality Roadmap. So let's get started with quality plans. So what is a quality plan? Well, according to the American Society for Quality, a quality plan is a document that specifies quality practices, resources, and the sequence of activities relevant to a particular product, service, project, or contract. Now, it's important to understand that in the context we're talking about quality plans for life sciences and regulated quality operations. And specifically, we're talking about quality plans that encompass quality assurance, quality control, and the quality aspects and compliance aspects of production operations and related activities. Well, why are quality plans important at all? Well, in my over 30 plus years of experience inside FDA-regulated life sciences companies, and now working as a consultant to those same companies, I've seen that in many quality operations, people are constantly overworked. They're scrambling to keep up. There's a constant flow of deviations, nonconformances, CAPAs, product and process problems, cost reductions, procedural reviews, internal audits, inspections. The list goes on and on and on. And really what I've seen over the years is that people are either treading water or actually drowning in their role inside these companies. And I think that a lot of this is that executives really hate to adequately fund quality. They often see this as something to do grudgingly. They'd rather invest in marketing and sales, and hopefully nothing bad will happen. So quality operations teams often are what I call treading water, or actually drowning, trying to do their day-to-day job, just trying to keep up. But what they really need to do is focus on those things that can reduce risk and improve operations. What they really need to do is get to the other shore. But in fact, they're using all their energy, their resources, and money simply just trying to keep their head above water. So they haven't even contemplated planning when that is exactly what they need to do to get to shore, either the close shore or preferably that shore across the lake that will really get them improvements. And what should quality plans include? Well, going back to ASQ, and generally according to ASQ, quality plans should include the following elements: the objectives to be attained from the quality plan. What are you trying to accomplish? steps in the process, allocation of responsibilities, authority, and resources for the execution of the quality plan and to get it to completion. Any specific documented standards, practices, procedures, or instructions that are relevant to the plan. Suitable progress review at appropriate stages, a documented procedure for changes and modifications, a method for measuring achievement of your quality objectives, and then anything else you need to really meet the objectives of what you're trying to accomplish with your quality plan. Now, so ASQ's thinking on what quality plans should include is great, but we really shouldn't feel like we're constrained to that sort of a comprehensive structure. So what we really need to think about when we're thinking about quality plans is, first, what do you as a company want to focus on and accomplish? Second, why as a company are we going to do and do we want to be doing this work? What's the purpose in this? What are the objectives? And three, when are we going to complete this work? In my mind, really, these are the basic elements that will be useful as a quality plan. So again, don't feel constrained by this being a huge lift. It's important to understand that quality plans are generally not required by law or regulation. Now, there is an exception to that that is found in the medical device space, and it is really found in 21 CFR 820.20D, which explicitly calls out for a requirement for quality planning. Now, I've really never seen a medical device company over the years that actually embraces this, and also have really never seen FDA make a big deal out of it, but it is there. So what is important is that quality plans are your document, something that will improve your company's performance, reduce risk to your organization, and provide support for your entire organization. And as a result, really, a minimal approach is better than no approach at all. When we think about planning, we really first need to think about goals, objectives. What are we trying to accomplish? And for our purposes, we really need to think about the primary goals of regulated quality operations. In this context, I believe there are three primary goals of regulated quality operations. Now, other people may differ, but over the years, I've found that when you think about quality, there are really three primary objectives that quality organizations are asked to meet. The first is enable production. The whole purpose of quality operations and quality in general is to enable the production of quality products on a consistent and reliable basis. So quality organizations should have as at least a primary goal the objective of enabling production to consistently manufacture goods of high quality to predetermined quality specifications. The next, control costs. I've never seen a quality organization that has not been asked to control costs. Quality compliance in regulated industry is not an end in and of itself. It's a means to an end of supporting the company's business of manufacturing regulated products for consumers and patients. It is essential to support the business that quality operating costs be controlled in the best way possible while achieving all of the other objectives of the organization. And finally, quality organizations are charged with reducing risk to the company. This risk flows, one, from risk to product manufacturing, or in other words, product quality risk, but primarily in regulated manufacturing, since the quality organization is also charged with responsibility for regulatory compliance. Reducing risk is very much about reducing enforcement risk from regulators. In fact, it is arguable that from a business perspective, reducing regulator risk may be one of the primary objectives of the quality organization, since the adverse consequences of regulatory risk from regulators can be crippling to a commercial operation. And those of you who have been involved with significant enforcement activity from US FDA or other regulators certainly know that financial impact. Now that we understand some of the goals of a quality plan, what are some of the benefits? Now, I won't go through all these points in detail, but in summary, there are really three main benefits to the establishment of a quality plan. First is improved quality and compliance governance. You're going to obtain clearer objectives that are tied to initiatives and daily work. You're going to attain clear alignment of resources and resource spends to operational goals. You're going to have a formal review and alignment with your business and operations stakeholders that really will facilitate cooperation among the parties. You're going to have an increased ability to budget for compliance risk reduction objectives. You're also going to effectively utilize your quality operations resources better. And that really flows from risk-based prioritization, which will ensure effective work alignment across your organization. Prioritization ensures effective resource usage and reduce costs. And prioritization and complexity considerations reduce risk quickly at the most favorable costs. So you really have an idea of where you can drive down risks, one of your primary objectives, in a way that is very cost effective. And finally, you're going to achieve outcome improvements and increase sustainability. You're going to get reduced risk from health authority inspections and increase your ability to support base business operations. You're going to reduce operational frustration. In fact, I would argue that you will increase your positive quality culture from having good, solid quality plans that provide focus to your organization. You're going to improve stakeholder support and trust. Your stakeholders will have a better idea of what you as a quality organization are trying to achieve for them in the business context. And finally, improve financial performance and reduce pushback on quality. Quality always gets pushback as being a roadblock, and reducing that pushback on quality will help dramatically. In short, though, quality planning creates a roadmap to improved quality capability. And when you think about quality capability, and this is how compliance architects use quality capability, and it's really our quality capability maturity model, most of the measures of increasingly positive quality capability are characterized through the absence of negative characteristics. So you're reducing the failure opportunities and the risk opportunities. And as a result, at least part of a journey to an improved quality capability can be considered through the reduction of negative operational elements, failure points, gaps, risks, issues, etc., that really drive your capability downward. So after we've talked a little bit about quality planning, let's talk about risk. So risk is a concept I love, and it's a concept that's critically important to understand in the context of FDA-regulated and life sciences companies. And reducing risk is a primary objective of regulated quality operations. Well, but really, why should we consider risk in regulated companies? Well, initially, the vast majority of definable risk in regulated companies equates to a corresponding financial risk. When we think about regulator enforcement, it is extraordinarily expensive to respond to enforcement activities. I said this before, has anyone ever responded to and remediated an FDA warning letter? Has anybody ever been involved in a consent decree? These are huge dollar cost items, in the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars or more in cost. Next, though, manifested risk is highly disruptive to ongoing regulated business operations. Let's think back to our objectives, enabling production. How can we really enable production if we have allowed business operations to be disrupted by manifested risk? You can't make money if you're not shipping product out there. And that's really something that is very important to understand. Next, and tying into our last point, minimizing risk results in predictable outcomes. You've got better cost control and an ability to reliably plan for business objectives. Often risk occurrence cleanup activities are orders of magnitude more costly than proactive risk mitigation measures. You think about in our lives, we have insurance. And we have insurance because the payment of that proactive cost, even over the lifetime of a risk, is much, much less, much more cost effective than the occurrence of that risk that gets manifested. And finally, because of all the foregoing in regulated companies, proactive risk mitigation activities typically have a very high return on investment. Now, when we think about risk, we probably think of the term risk management. And risk management is a term that's often used, but I believe is really not often well understood, and even less often well applied and executed. I also think that risk management is often used in a way that says we must identify and act on all risks that are present within our operations with our product. Yeah, and I just personally don't believe that risk management is about addressing all risks. It certainly is about understanding your risks and your overall risk profile. But risk must be prioritized because not all risks are equal. and therefore not all risks should necessarily be addressed. So I thought I'd share with you, as we're talking about risk, what a couple of consensus standards consider risk management to be. First, ISO 31000 defines risk management as coordinated activities to direct and control an organization with regard to risk. ICH-Q9 defines risk management as a systematic process for the assessment, control, communication, and review of risks to the quality of the drug product across the product lifecycle. And ISO 14971, and I know it's a kind of a pharmaceutical-based crowd, that's a medical device risk management concept primarily, defines risk management as the systematic application of management policies, procedures, and practices to the tasks of analyzing, evaluating, controlling, and monitoring risk. Since this audience is mostly from the pharmaceutical industry, I felt it was appropriate to mention as an additional element regarding risk management, as outlined in ICH Guideline Q9, Pharmaceutical Quality Risk Management. So ICH Q9 is the definitive guidance for quality risk management in the pharmaceutical industry. Initially effective in 2006, Q9 continues to provide industry with a basic framework for quality risk management. Notably, Q9 has been formally adopted as guidance by the US FDA. So although not binding, ICH Q9 reflects FDA's thinking relative to quality risk management for the pharmaceutical industry. For those of you who are not familiar with ICH Q9, I would encourage you to find it on the web and become familiar with it. Also though, and this is very important, since this is only a guidance, ICH Q9 should provide a framework for your organization and not a mandate. You can approach quality risk management differently or more robustly if you wish. What's really important is that you consider quality risk management as a foundational principle for meeting the objectives of regulated quality operations, and that you incorporate these principles into your organizational DNA. So how well is FDA and other regulator enforcement risk assessed, managed, and remediated in FDA-regulated companies? Well, from our work with many companies on this topic, I'd actually say not so well. So companies day-to-day are typically very focused on meeting the requirements of GMPs by executing their quality system activities. Quality system activities that may occur may help reduce risk. But remember, FDA and other regulator enforcement risk really isn't directly assessed regularly. An audit may assess theoretical noncompliance, but it doesn't generally assess risk because not all noncompliance presents the same level of risk. And risk certainly isn't managed, or enforcement risk certainly isn't managed as a discrete quality system activity. FDA and other regulator enforcement risk really flows from how well we execute on quality system activities, especially the important ones. But what companies don't often understand is that at a risk level, the only regular routine evaluations we generally do are internal audits. And audits are really not risk assessment tools. Really, audit outcomes are more like the world's longest and most annoying to-do list. Yes, audits are important, but do they really measure, assess, or help define what a company's enforcement risk is? Do audits help you understand risk? Do they help prioritize and focus on what is creating the most risk for your organization? And I would argue that no, not typically. I have generally not seen companies that have a good understanding of their risk from an internal audit program. And at least one professional in the field agrees with me. I found this in getting ready for this webinar, and I couldn't agree more with the premise. The pharmaceutical industry desperately needs usable approaches to identify, analyze, evaluate, and I see our survey just popped up. So as I'm doing this, I'd like you to respond to this survey. And I'll finish reading this. The pharmaceutical industry desperately needs usable approaches to identify, analyze, evaluate, and mitigate a wide variety of business and operating risks to minimize product quality risk for our patients. The tools listed in ICH Q9 are process-focused. None of them properly treat the uncertainty component of a risk utility by using probabilistic concepts. And that's Mark Witcher. So if you'd please complete the questions on the poll in front of you, we would greatly appreciate it. And I don't know when that will disappear. So hopefully you've all had time to complete the 4 questions. I'll give you 1 additional second to complete those. Okay, we will keep moving on. Now, moving on and continue to focus on risk, all risk must be considered in context. So what do I mean by this? Well, in short, for a company to truly understand its risk portfolio, it may require multiple risk models. What's crazy to me is that some life sciences companies don't even have one formal risk model. They may think they are managing risk, but they're really managing activities. And to really understand and manage your portfolio of problems, risks, gaps, to really determine focus, you need to understand risk in context. This means that measuring, quantifying, characterizing risk has to be done in the context of the portfolio of risk that you're considering. So, for example, a risk model for computer system security protection does not and may not work for product quality failure risk. A risk model for financial controls or financial market viability does not or may not work for FDA enforcement purposes. A risk model for environmental contamination control does not or may not work for data integrity risk management purposes. Risk reduction, risk management requires the proper context for proper assessment, measurement, and solution development. And as a matter of recognition of this concept, this premise is formally identified in the consensus standard that I mentioned earlier, ISO 31000 in section 5.3, establishing the context. So ISO recognizes that context is essential for a characterization of risk. Now, once you understand the context of your risks, you need to characterize risk. And risk characterization, as I said, depends on the context. And risk characterization has 2 primary elements. The first is you need to understand your risk factors. In other words, where does risk flow from? And secondly, you need to understand your different risk measures. How do you assess individual risks relative to other risks? And both your risk vectors and risk measures are different depending on the context. It's important to understand that assessing risk is not an absolute exercise. There is no universal standard on risk quantification, especially considering context. One person's risk tolerance for, say, outdoor activities, rock climbing, for example, may be vastly different than another person, say, who thinks getting a sunburn at a beach is risky. This is extremely important to understand. You need to understand your risks in relative terms and not be concerned with absolutism in measurement. Robust risk characterization allows you to gain a good characterization, a good understanding of the relative concern of individual risk items such that you can prioritize, focus, and reduce risk. So in the life sciences regulated industry business success performance context, what are some example risk factors? In other words, where does risk flow from? Well, you can generally think about risk to a company flowing from 2 main vectors and then sub-vectors within those main vectors. And those 2 main vectors are internal risks, things that occur within the 4 walls of your organization, and external risks, risks that are imposed upon your organization. So some internal risk examples are, say, product failure from product deficiencies, poor product design, risk material quality, raw material quality, things like intentional misconduct, personnel performance failures, business process failures, mismanagement. External risk, those that are imposed from the outside, may be things like FDA or other regulator enforcement. Financial and market declines, the environmental, the economic context of the world, competition that pops up, other regulation enforcement, environmental, financial, and then acts of God, pandemics, like we're currently in right now, is a huge risk, war and unrest. So these are the examples of where risk flows from, or what I call risk vectors. Now, the next part of characterization of risk, though, is the risk measurement. And the following are examples of how different risk measures apply in different risk contexts. So we have, say, in financial investing, things like, and for any of you people who are who have invested in global markets around the world, you'll be familiar with these, or maybe not. Things like alpha and beta measures, something called value at risk, and Sharpe's ratio. These are financial measures that measure risk in a financial investing context. In the context we work in, manufacturing and product quality, we have FMEA. FMEA is really one of, if not the only, quantitative risk measurement approach that applies in the context we work in. And there are variants on this for process and for design, PFMEAs and DFMEAs. And finally, in the information security, ITIS, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit because I think they're quite interesting, are things called DREAD, OWASP, and CVSS. When you look at it, it's really surprising to me that given the complexity of manufacturing, development, and commercialization of regulated life science products, that the only widely known and accepted model, to my knowledge, based on my research, is the FMEA risk model. A few of the risk measurement models I've come across that stand out are really from the information security and information services context. The first of these I've showed was DREAD. And DREAD stands for damage potential, reproducibility, exploitability, affected users, and discoverability. And so the DREAD risk measure is really a sum of the damage measure, reproducibility measure, exploitability measure, affected user measure, and discoverability measure divided by 5. It's pretty much an average. The second is OWASP. And OWASP, hard to say, stands for Open Web Application Security Project. It's really a community that produces methodologies, tools, and technologies in the field of web application security. And calculating OWASP risk is as easy as multiplying likelihood by impact. However, likelihood is then measured by submeasures, what are called threat agent factors, vulnerability factors. Impact is measured by technical impact and business impact factors. And finally, the third, CVSS, is composed of 3 metrics groups: base, temporal, and environmental, each consisting of a series of measures. Now, there are other risk management activities that are not tied directly to relative risk measurement and prioritization. But these are more what I would consider risk management processes and methodologies, not risk measurement. And some of these are certainly HACCP, something that you may be familiar with, hazard analysis and critical control point. Something called HAZOP, hazard and operability studies, things like Ishikawa diagrams, fault tree analyses. Again, these are more methodologies than they are measurement. And I wanted to share with you quickly what the CVSS and OWASP risk scoring models look like, to give you an idea of what a risk scoring models look like. Now, both of these models characterize risk and specifically quantify risk or relative risk and employ a qualitative characterization of risk, which really translates risk from a subjective amorphous concept into a semi-quantitative relative risk score, very much along the lines of an FMEA RPN number. So you can look at some of the factors here, and that kind of results through the algorithmic transformation into a score. In the same way with the OWASP risk scoring model, this is really a transformation of qualitative characterization elements into a semi-quantitative risk scoring model. So hopefully those were helpful and illustrative for you to understand that you can determine relative risk scores with models that can give you a good solid characterization of risk. So now that we've talked about quality plans and risk, let's talk about risk-based quality plans. So in part 1 on quality plans, we talked about the goal of regulated quality operations. So expanding on quality planning and incorporating the principles of risk we just discussed, there are a couple of key principles we should consider when we think about risk-based quality plans generally. First, it's important to remember that quality plans are intended to drive activities and align objectives. And it's also important to remember that not everything can or should be done at once. Each and every risk is different risk, different impact, different cost, different complexity. Characterization of each issue, etc., is critical to differentiation. Second, smart, prioritized risk reduction is and should be a primary driver of quality plans, since the business impacts from recalls, product failures, and enforcement can be staggering, and reduction of risk actually drives the other primary goals, enabling production and controlling costs. So many of the improvements or remediations that reduce risk of quality or compliance also enable production, improve throughput, reduce scrap, etc. So controlling costs through smart resource utilization occurs through prudent prioritization and differentiation of risk and remedial improvement activities, operational predictability, and controlling unanticipated hazard and disaster costs. Overall, a risk-based quality plan helps us to achieve the primary objectives of a regulated quality operation. A risk-based quality plan is enabling and action-oriented. Prioritization provides focus, and focus creates a bias for action. The plan needs to focus on achieving the organization's quality performance and outcome vision within a defined set of organizational expectation and constraints. And these constraints may include finite resources, financial expectations, legal and regulatory requirements and expectations, and corporate norms and business conduct standards. What we're really doing is translation of reducing the bad and enabling the good. They're both part of a sound risk-based quality plan. Now, reflecting on our early discussion of treading water or drowning from the huge amount of non-focused activity, all of which is important, but none of which is getting us to our objective, risk-based quality plans help us convert chaos to order. This process is really enabling, it's calming, and it's efficient when applied to complex organizational models. So what does a risk-based quality plan look like? Well, initially, a risk-based quality plan is not your project plan. It's not your remediation plan or your remediation workstream activity plan. It is a focus plan, something that aligns all stakeholders, participants, and program leaders. It will certainly lead to a project plan or one or more project plans or remediation plans or remediation workstream plan. But those are really subservient to the quality plan. In fact, a risk-based quality plan is a variant of what is often called a risk register, but adapted and implemented in the context of FDA-regulated life sciences companies. Risk-based quality plans will include objectives along with a comprehensive list of gaps, risks, and issues aggregated to a level where chartering of remediation plans is possible. They should also include assignment of a relative risk score to establish relative risk-focused prioritization and establishment of an organizational resource impact measure to further focus on the easiest to fix gaps, risks, and issues. So this is an example of what a risk-based quality plan can or may look like. Doesn't look too different than some of the things that are probably found within your current operation, procedures, policies, practices. We identify purpose and scope, responsibilities, objectives for the plan, but we get into how we are compiling the output of our current gaps, risks, and issues. How do we prioritize it? And we might show additional information and additional detail on how we're going to be using that information to really drive quality output and quality performance improvement. So now that we've talked about quality plans generally, risk, and risk-based quality plans, I'd like to introduce you to how we have implemented the foregoing principles by introducing our CRP and Quality Roadmap, our risk-based, complexity-considered quality planning methodology. And I've got a short little video for you to watch.
Quality leaders are constantly scrambling with little clarity in how to prioritize activities to reduce risk and improve operations. Understanding FDA enforcement risks.
Sorry about that.
Challenging. What are the risks we really need?
I'm going to restart this if I can.
It doesn't have to. Quality leaders are constantly scrambling with little clarity in how to prioritize activities to reduce risk and improve operations. Understanding FDA enforcement risks is challenging. What are the risks we really need to focus on? It doesn't have to be this way. Our clients are benefiting from the CRP and Quality Roadmap, a modern scientific quality planning approach that prioritizes initiatives based on both risk and complexity. We work with you alongside company personnel to quickly aggregate and assess risks, issues, gaps, and remediation complexity, bringing order to chaos. Scientific scoring algorithms and business analytics provide extensive data visualization and reporting. Understand your risk, focus your resources, and get on the road to compliance. Quality lead.
So I hope you enjoyed that. We love these explainer videos. They do a great job of telling complex stories in a simple manner. So our approach was to create a risk-based quality plan that would help companies understand, prioritize, and focus efforts on fixing and remediating what we really call its basket, its grouping, its collection of gaps, risks, and issues. We use a structured, proven methodology, proprietary risk and complexity algorithms, remember, measuring in context, and a cloud-based software tool. And our methodology for the CRP and Quality Roadmap can really be summarized as follows, what we call the 4 Rs. First, we roll up the risk, gaps, and issues to an appropriate level for remediation. We review these risks rolled up to ensure this aggregation and roll-up reflects an alignment across your organization's affected operations. We risk rank and a complexity score. That's really the key to creating focus and resource utilization. And of course, then we remediate, developing the remediation plans for the items that fall out as the items to focus on based on the risk and complexity scoring. Now, we talked about this a bit in the benefits section earlier, but what we found is that the CRP and Quality Roadmap methodology and approach really eliminates the roadblocks to quality planning. So what do I mean by that? Well, first, relative to alignment. Creating alignment of executive stakeholders on strategic quality planning consideration using a formal structured methodology for quantifying FDA compliance enforcement risk is really important. Everyone is aligned because it's participative and inclusive. So people are involved in the process. Risk calibration. Algorithms transform qualitative risk information and assumptions into quantitative data for compliance risk reporting and comparability purposes. It really creates risk measurement and impact calibration across the organization. So executives don't think that it's some quality Yahoo that's just eyeballing risks and spending more money than they should. Constrained resources. This method and tool introduces a novel complexity factor into planning that really facilitates resource considerations and creates an understanding of organizational capability. It really helps to show good financial stewardship to executive stakeholders. Finally, configurable document outputs. So working with an organization, Word and PowerPoint document outputs with high impact graphics make it easy to integrate the process into your organization, improving adoption and accelerating progress across the organization. And really, finally, a proven structured approach. So you don't have to make this up. An easy-to-use cloud-based software tool allows companies and leads companies through the development of their data-driven strategic quality planning and risk management plan. So it really jumpstarts and enables you to get from a point of chaos to a point of having direction in a very short period of time. Now, key to the model are our proprietary risk scoring elements, the CRPN number and the complexity factor. So the CRPN number is really an algorithmic determination of relative compliance risk, as we talked about. It's similar to the OWASP number, the CVSS number, across a portfolio of risks defined from assigning objective weighted measures to subjective compliance risk factors. And this is really a function of gap size, how big is the gap from the expectation of the regulators, detectability, how detectable is it to the regulators, and then the enforcement response from the regulators. The complexity factor is really an algorithmic determination of the complexity to remediate and improve these risk factors, derived from assigning objective weighted measures to organizational complexity factors such as remediation costs, departments involved, time to remediate, etc. So let's take a look at what an output of this methodology might look at. So this is an output of an actual list of gaps, risks, and issues that we developed from working with a client in the past. This table provides information sorted first by the CRPN number from highest to lowest. So if you're looking at this chart, this table, this reflects risk that are really highest to lowest to the client, along with the complexity factor. So if you're looking at risk, the ID number 7 and number 19, for this client, these are the highest risks that they should be focusing on as a company. Also, though, the addition of metadata to individual risk items gives us a lot of reporting options. And this is an example of grouping of the data by quality system area. Now, that's also risk prioritized. So you could group by CAPAs, you could group by responsible person, you can group by and report on a lot of different elements, really depending on what metadata you think will help drive your quality plan and reporting outcomes. Finally, we have a view of the data that's sorted by complexity factor. So this really shows the most complex remediation projects visualizing relative risk and complexity in a number of different ways. But here, by putting the data in quadrants, where we focus on things like, or we have quadrants on high risk, high complexity, low risk, high complexity, low risk, low complexity, and high risk, low complexity, we really have an understanding of how our risk translates into the ability to execute and remediate. So where we'd probably focus first is in areas that present high risk and low complexity, what we call, or what is generally called, low-hanging fruit. So this slide is a way to really get stakeholders aligned on that sort of a quantification and differentiation of risk to focus your resources and action. So finally, all of this focus and alignment really creates successful plans. So you can look at risk scored items in multiple ways. In this case, we're looking at items as enablers for the company's business strategy, say like process validation risk less than 40, change control risk less than 40, and supplier quality risk less than 40. Likewise, and this is, of course, just made up, but disablers of the company's business strategy could include management risk greater than 70, complaints and adverse events greater than 60, and internal audits greater than 50. So these numbers are not absolute. They can be changed to align to your company's risk tolerances and business objectives, and are really part of what your company brings to the table to include in this process. So we've covered a lot of information in a relatively short period of time. I hope this was useful, and I hope you've got a lot of questions. But what do we do with all this information? What should you take back to your operations? What sort of a path forward should you really consider? Well, first, I'd say consider. Consider whether your quality compliance operations are using risk-based complexity considered planning to support your unique business model. I would seek to understand your gaps, risks, and issues, and the drain they're placing on your business and operational objectives. I'd challenge your current approaches, or suggest you challenge your current approaches to quality operations and quality risk management. Are they creating certainty, sustainability, and clear risk reduction outcomes? I'd recommend you develop a strategy, a quality strategy that incorporates risk-based complexity considered quality plans to achieve improved quality operations outcomes and business objectives. I'd also obtain expert assistance with assessments, planning, remediation activities, governance as necessary to ensure a comprehensive, effective risk-based program. Then finally, as always, I'd assess, measure, revise, and improve these strategies and plans as necessary to achieve your objectives. And that concludes the formal part of the presentation. We are right at, I guess, right around 47 minutes into the hour, and that leaves us about 13 minutes for questions. So please, I'm going to be moving to the Q&A, and I will address these in order of occurrence. So please please include, please type in your questions and I will try to answer them.
I think, John, we have a few questions here. So first of all, the presentation was great. It was very informative. In the chat here, I see we've got a question from Michelle. Can you see the message in the chat?
In the chat. I don't see it in the Q&A. Hold on. Let me see in the chat. Hold on. Hold on.
Or if you want, I can read it out to you.
Oh, chat, I got it. Okay,
Oh, great.
This is from, okay. This is from Michelle?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hi, Michelle. Thank you. So Michelle said, during these difficult times, we're rescheduling audits from on-site to remote. What are your thoughts to assess the risk of a remote audit? What clients shall we consider to confirm eligibility and feasibility of remote audits? Thanks. How is complexity factor calculated? So, Michelle, that's a great question. And we are currently in the process of working with clients on remote audits and actually remote risk planning and quality planning models. I think you can do a good job, although not a perfect job, of remotely doing audits and compliance assessments. And what I think you need to think about is that you're going to have to caveat to any parties that you're doing remote audits on that any of the information provided is going to be subject to verification and will be verified at the point in time that we can all go back to at least some level of normalcy and go on site. There are things that are just necessary to be confirmed on site. But there's a lot of information that can be requested and information that can be gained with the proper structures of asking questions with good collaborative tools that can facilitate the communication. There's a lot of things to consider. We've been working with clients on this, and it's complicated. It's certainly easier to go on site, but I think it can be done. And but I would also say that it needs to have a insurance follow-up that information will be subject to verification as soon as practicable after restrictions are removed from on-site coordination. Finally, how is complexity factor calculated? Well, we provide our clients with that calculation information, but in essence, it includes factors of things like how many departments are involved, your cost, your time to remediate, things like that. So that we would provide you as a client. Okay, let's see. This is from Shri. Are there any prediction models pharma companies use to mitigate compliance risks? Well, Shri, so it's a good question. And frankly, that is why we developed the methodology that we have developed. And to my knowledge, again, other than FMEA, which is certainly useful and valid in the right context, I'm not aware of one. And that's why we absolutely developed this methodology and approach, because we saw that there was a gap in the marketplace and in the service to the industry to help companies understand and drive down compliance risks. It's really that simple. And we've used this methodology with numerous companies and large companies, well-known companies, some of the world's best companies, and it really helps drive down compliance risk. We have a case study we'd be happy to provide. One of our clients, one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, over the course of 3 years went from, I think it was, these numbers aren't exact, but it's like 16 or 15 43 observations down to like, I think it was 10 or so, down to like 7. Now, I don't like to quote numbers. What I would say from that is they had a better control and understanding of their risks, what were the important things to work on and what were not the important things to work on. So their overall risk profile was driven down, which is really what is the benefit of any risk-based quality planning approach. Okay, I'm going to look for more I don't see any more Q&A. I'm going to go back to the chat. I don't see any additional questions. Are there any other questions for me? We have a few more minutes. I'd be happy to answer some. Oh, wait, one new message. Let's see. All right, this is from Mark. Failure to recognize the magnitude of the problem is often a barrier to solving the problem. Have you used COQ, cost of quality, prevention, appraisal, and failure costs to help quantify the problem? So great question, Mark. And I'm certainly familiar with cost of quality. Actually, a couple of colleagues of mine years ago wrote an article it was an ISPE magazine, or it might have been Pharmaceutical Technology, gosh, back in the early 2000s. So I'm very familiar with cost of quality. So, and I think cost of quality is a great tool and should be something that companies should do as a matter of course with respect to creating that that stakeholder alignment. So I would say yes, this is cost of quality is a very positive activity on the part of quality organizations. I would say the problem, Mark, is that this gets into the drowning slide. People are just busy. It's really it's a highly reactive activity. So kind of this more measured, methodical approach of, what are things costing us? People are just trying to, get CAPAs through and deviations closed. And there isn't that dialogue. And this is what really needs to change. So yes, cost of quality can be an asset. And I would say you could incorporate cost of quality principles with this sort of methodology. You're really talking about risk, you're talking about cost. It helps build that, what I would call almost like that three-legged stool of what your objectives are. So it's a resounding yes. I haven't ever done really a cost of quality analysis in general, but again, I've got colleagues that have done that before, and it's very powerful. Okay, let's see. Questions. I don't see any open questions. I'll give a last call for questions. It is 5 minutes to, okay, I think I see one just popped in from Jeff. Usually what should be the periodicity to review this plan? I would say that if you do a good job with this plan, you're going to have plenty to work on and plenty of focus. And you should have as part of your plan a review cycle and a process to keep it current and updated. Plans in the context that we're talking about can never remain static because things are constantly changing. Risk is fluid and dynamic. So I would say that it should be reviewed and updated in a minor basis with respect to progress to plan, current status of prioritization, quarterly. I would probably think about doing a major recess of the plan every 18 months to 2 years, such that you kind of do a redo and kind of a re-objective look at your plan probably every 18 months to 2 years. I just got something in from Michelle. What should a risk registry include? So a risk registry really should be considered a comprehensive kind of collection, listing of the risks you find in your organization. And this is where things get kind of different depending on how you approach this. Risk registry has to exist in some sort of a context. And so we talked about things like the OWASP and the CVSS in the context of information security. So your risk register should exist in context. So you might have in a development cycle or a design cycle for medical devices, a risk register relative to your product quality design. And you could consider that something, you could use a DFMEA, design FMEA for that risk register. Your risk register for business continuity would be different than your risk register for compliance. So what should a compliance risk registry include? Well, that would include certainly identification and characterization of the risk. You need to make sure you understand risk at the right level, though, because if you go into too granular an activity, it really just becomes an activity. Very granular activities don't create risks or big risks that should be tracked at a management and execution or mediation level. So those roll-ups really need to be looking at almost systemic contributors to risk so that you can charter programs that drive down that risk in detail. So it should include what is the risk, what is the risk comprised of, how does it link to the rest of your quality system? Are there CAPAs? Are there deviations? Are there inspection observations? Does it flow from internal audits? Does it flow from all those entities? How is it manifested? And then metadata surrounding the elements of the individual risk. So you think of the risk as the center of the universe, and the metadata elements really exist around that. So that's what I would say that any risk registry should include.